Hi. Maps in video games. I've seen them, you've seen them. They're maps, ranging from being a tool for the directionally challenged through to more kind of pivotal aspects of the game. There's no real shoe that fits all when it comes to video game maps, where some exist to give an explanation for the expansive amount of content that a game might have. Others, I guess you could describe as being a bit more decorative, I suppose. But anyway, I just wanted to take a step back and analyse and kind of more so admire some of the details I guess I describe as lesser importance in video games, and overall just analyse what inherently makes a video game map good or bad. So yeah, sit back, relax, hey, grab a cup of tea whilst you're on your feet. If you're probably not on your feet, I don't know why you'd be watching this standing. But anyway, join me as I hyperfixate on the minor details and nuances of video game maps. Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice, is a visually stunning game that is filled to the brim with dynamic environments, vibrancy, and in general just so much character. But with it being such a fast-paced game, I feel like it can be kind of easy to overlook just how beautiful some of these areas actually are. Like as you're throwing yourself like headfirst into the absolutely smooth as butter, satisfying combat that Sekiro has, I feel like you don't often take the time to just look around and be like, that is stunning. This environment that you've placed me in is fantastic. In a typical Souls-like fashion, Sekiro actually has no map for guidance, I suppose. You know, it's got no huge X marks the spots on the map saying, hey, go here or do this, interact with here. It kind of tells it through subtle storytelling. Sekiro tends to emphasise kind of your natural exploration through the game's world instead of guiding you with a pointing finger. I think it's best described as a game that kind of wants you to get lost in it. It wants you to explore all these kind of nooks and crannies, to just enjoy the world that they've spent so long creating for you to play. But I guess that raises a question in a video about video game maps. Why lead with Sekiro, which apparently has no map? And the answer to that is what's kind of stemmed this entire topic in the first place for me, I suppose. Breaking traditional boundaries, Sekiro features no map for guidance per se, but it does feature a map in a sense. The antique map in the game is a kind of purely cosmetic depiction of the entire explorable world. I don't know if that's giving it too broad of a term. Every area you can go to in the game is on this map. So it's kind of like a map, but not really to help you get around, it's more so just to emphasise the kind of natural beauty of all of these areas that you'll go to, I suppose. You know, interestingly enough, when I was kind of doing my research about the antique map, I came across a few websites that allow you to purchase real-life antique maps of Japan from those kind of eras. Now overall, I mean, it was a super interesting dive. I think I spent like a good 20-30 minutes just kind of eyeing up all these maps and looking at my wallet and realising that I would never have the funds to afford the majority of these. But I'm rambling. Two of these maps actually stood out a bit more than the rest for me. The first of which being this map of Inada from the Kasama municipality. That's a hard word for me to say. Anyway, that map is from 1868. The second of which is a map of a Japanese war game known as Sugoroku from 1894. I probably butchered the pronunciation of that a lot, but that's okay. Sekiro's antique map had a lot of factors, in my opinion anyway, that resembled these maps heavily, which kind of leads me to believe that maybe the antique map in Sekiro was heavily or directly inspired by these maps specifically, I guess. But yeah, obviously, I mean, that's entirely speculative, and it wouldn't be right for me to say that conclusively. I guess that's just kind of what my little ape brain put two and two together and was like, hey, these things look very similar together. Like, especially this 1868 one. I think a lot of the art style tends to match up, but who knows, I could be entirely wrong, but I thought they were very similar and I found it interesting. But anyway, all of this was to say that I think that Sekiro's antique map is a visually stunning representation of the game's world that realistically wasn't a necessary inclusion in the slightest. It's a very unemphasized map in the game. I don't think there's a point where it specifically tells you, hey, look at this map, or you can do something with this map. It just exists for the purpose of existing, and I like that. So yeah, that was Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice. And to be honest, I can't really think of a smooth segue or transition into the next game, so I think I'll just settle for a very unsatisfying and abrupt cut. Hollow Knight's map, in my opinion, spoiler alert I guess, is a masterpiece in map design. I really think that few games I've played have been able to kind of balance an aspect of intricacy, detail, and gameplay elements so fluidly as Hollow Knight does. Now normally I feel like games kind of go down one of two aspects when it comes to maps. The first kind of being like, oh, here's the full world. Right off the bat, go explore, have fun. And the second of which being like, oh cool, you just entered like a new area. Here's the map in its entirety so that you can go and explore. Hello, Editing Jack here. I just want to clarify that I'm talking about the difference between seamless and segmented open worlds, where one lets you explore the entire world from the get-go, the other requires more of a story narrative to progress to new areas. That's all. Now, I'm not implying here that any of these two options are bad game design. I just think that Hollow Knight's choice of implementation when it comes to map design is beautifully done, and an odd choice of words for a game about sentient bugs, dare I say realistically. Where, like I mentioned, some games just give you the map like right off the bat, like you get it straight away. Hollow Knight kind of tends to challenge more of your cartography. It gives you pen and paper. Or I guess quill and paper, I suppose, so that you yourself can go and kind of fill in the gaps of what professional explorers and cartographers kind of missed on their exploration. And I think that's really neat. There's something about this that just really appeals to me personally as a person, I guess. Maybe it's the kind of dopamine rush of like looking at the map and seeing the gaps and places that I've missed and just wondering like, oh, well, what could be through there? Like, is it a new item? Is it like just a dead end? It could be an entire new area, or maybe even just a spot to just sit and admire the view. Either way, it's satisfying to me at least. I think if I were to get really specific with an aspect of the game, a point that emphasises my kind of sentiment about this feeling would be the first time that you as a player enter Deep Nest. Now Deep Nest is a very hostile and dark and kind of unforgiving environment. It's really easy to just get lost or like ambushed by scary bugs. So much so that the kind of professional cartographer of the universe, that's a very big statement, of the universe, wow. He refuses to kind of go off the beaten path. You've got a very linear direction to follow when you first get this map, which ultimately leaves you, the player, with a map to fill out for yourself. You're kind of forced into this position where you, as a player, need to go and brave the unknown, and I just like that. At this stage, I'm kind of aware that I've been speaking about the physical in-game maps for quite some time, so I might change subject, but I think I've got one last little point I'd want to mention, and that is the fact that you don't need to get the maps. Although the game is heavily revolved around you having them, it never forces your hand to collect even one map. Like, if you really wanted to, you could just play the entire game without them. And that is just another way that I think Hollow Knight's map, albeit through the absence of a map, kind of breaks the mold of video game maps as a standard. Let me ask you something. What's important to you in a game? I'm not trying to get that deep. Do you prioritize being able to save frequently, knowing exactly where each NPC is at any given time? Now, some of you might know exactly where I'm going with this, and that's great, because I'm going to talk about pins. Pins are a feature of Hollow Knight that allow you to kind of mark places of interest. So whether it's the bench saving points, the fast travel points, NPC locations, and like 5 more, I think. Ultimately, this is to say that Hollow Knight's map is tailored to you. You can buy these pins and you can choose what you would rather have in your map at any given time. And I just kind of find that interesting. And you can even take that one more step further with markers, which take my previous point and kind of up it to the next level, I guess. With markers, you decide where it goes and ultimately why it goes. How neat. Now, the Hollow Knight map visually is absolutely rampant with detail. In contrast to kind of just depictions of long hallways and corridors and the big important areas of interest, you instead get that little bit more. Like, look at this, I mean, spiky floors? Yeah, you already know that's thorns, unless you didn't. Wavy floors? That's water, baby. Now, outside of the given areas of importance that you as a player are intended to be drawn to, you just get that little bit more. Such is the case with these arches under this long room, as well as the kind of snapped ropes of this kind of run-down broken elevator shaft. Ultimately, I think that my appreciation for Hollow Knight's map can be summed up simply as, I like to have a choice. Customizability in a map is something that I think we don't get a lot of often in video game maps. Well, at least not in many games that I've played, personally. So who knows, maybe that's why it stands out to me and I ultimately appreciate it so much. But anyway, moving on. Guess whose camera died? NieR Automata is a game that is very near and dear to my heart. I've personally sunk a lot of time and, admittedly, tears into this game. I mean, there are so many unique factors that I think that I could talk about for like hours on end. From the sound design, music, environments, and overall just kind of the entire philosophical undertones that it's filled with. Not that I think that I'm intelligent enough to talk about those in good detail, but anyway, all this to say that I love it. You can't fit in there, right? Am I crazy? Oh, I'm so dumb. I thought my cat went in the cupboard. She just left through the door that's open. Like that was the tiniest gap. Anyway, so now that my fellow NieR Automata fans can't get too mad, I have to admit that I don't like NieR Automata's map design as much as I would like to. Now, in terms of uniqueness, NieR Automata's map is one of the most visually different maps that I have ever been faced with every element of the world being made up of cubes. I think it's very striking in its design. Not that that's necessarily the big negative or reason that I dislike the map. I mean, I've got nothing against geometry, if that's the issue. It's just kind of a detail that I think is a bit challenging to ignore when I'm talking about the map. In terms of positives, something I think I'll always admire about NieR Automata's map is its striking use of 3D. I mean, every explorable area above the ground in the world is fully constructed. I don't know what I'd call it, like a diorama, recreation. Anyway, it is fully modelled in 3D, and I think that's pretty interesting. I think it just really makes the areas of importance that bit more visually distinct, I suppose. Like being able to see the towering heights of the Forest Kingdom's castle, or in contrast, the very flat and well-rounded plains of the vast desert that you can explore. It just gives you another level to marvel over. Now, if you happen to be unfamiliar with NieR Automata, you might be looking at all this and thinking, what am I even looking at? And to answer that, isn't it obvious? I mean, that's clearly apartment blocks. Do you see my point? It can be rather difficult to make out heads or tails of a lot of what you're looking at, and I don't think I'm exaggerating to say that it's a map that is a visual learning process. Now, to add to this, when you pair a map that is inherently difficult to navigate in the first place with objective icons that are very similar in design, in my humble, unprofessional opinion, you start to get a recipe for confusion and misdirection, literally. Now, you see, this one here, that one is a main objective, and you can quite clearly tell that because it is made up of 4 side objective icons. Game design, I just think that's funny. Ultimately, the reasoning for this map being visually designed as is justified or given some form of explanation through the game's lore, but that's just not something that I kind of want to tap into in this video. I think that could be just something of its own, I suppose. But regardless, this video is dedicated to video game maps that I think either do a fantastic job at their premise or are just distinct or unique in the first place, and I think NieR Automata's map is definitely the latter of that. And to be honest, it was just a fantastic excuse to get to talk about one of my favourite games, NieR Automata. Next game. In what can only be defined as a very drastic contrast in genre, Stardew Valley's charming, casual farming simulator gameplay is paired with a super cute map of the valley that you, the player, live in, with art so stylized that it simply cements itself into my mind effortlessly. Though I'm very aware that it's not necessarily a groundbreaking, game-changing map design that really bends what we know as the status quo for video game map design. I mean, let's be honest, it's very charming. But even outside of that, I do think that there is a lot of detail that I think could go unnoticed for the more kind of casual player. Maybe my appreciation for a lot of the features of this map stem from the fact that I'm aware of times where these features weren't part of the Stardew Valley map. And I guess the first thing I'll mention, I suppose, is the fact that the player icon actively follows you as you kind of progress through the map. I think that's an interesting detail that wasn't originally in the game. But a bit more than that, it's a very helpful detail, especially like from a new player perspective. I think it just kind of adds that bit more when it comes to more kind of gameplay elements of the game. Fitting with the cozy aesthetic of every other aspect of the game, the fact that the map actively changes per season I think is a really interesting detail that, once again, wasn't originally added into the game. It's just a detail that I personally adore. Now, in terms of geographical detail, I think that Stardew Valley's map nails it on the head with this as well. I mean, take for instance these groups of like literally, I don't know where I'm pointing, it could be like anywhere. I don't have much space to work with. I don't know if I can like cut to a shot. Look, where can I stand? And possibly sideways. I'm recording this in portrait. That's a very bold choice. Anyway, like with these somewhere, group of like literally 4 pixels that represent each bridge that spans across the little islands in Cindersap Forest. Or for instance, these 4 dry patches of land at the very bottom of the forest that, funnily enough, match up with the 4 dry patches at the bottom of the forest. You know, it didn't need to be that specific, but I appreciate the fact that it did. I think ultimately it's just these minor details that stick out to me the most. And hey, whilst I'm talking about minor, tiny details, I might as well mention the literal 2 pixels that represent the entrance to the mines in the game. Or hey, maybe even this detailed patch of land in the bottom left that is used for one festival event that is subsequently one day of the entire game's year. So it's just interesting to see it so represented when it's so unemphasized in the game's actual gameplay, I suppose. I think a final detail that I want to touch upon stems more from gameplay than tiny minor details. By hovering your cursor over the various kind of points of interest in the game, you actually get a little bit of a rundown about what they are or what their general purpose is, I suppose. And even more subtle little secrets like this lonely stone by the pier that, as far as I'm aware, serves no actual in-game purpose other than being a fun map Easter egg that you can find. Stardew Valley is an amazing game, and to say it's a labour of love feels almost like an understatement, to be honest. Being fully developed by one person, Eric Barone has created a charm like no other. And to tie everything back together, I think my full appreciation for Stardew Valley's map stems from the fact that all of these tiny little details weren't necessary in the first place. Now, to make a game from scratch, I mean, that's one thing. To do it entirely by yourself, that's another. And to put this amount of detail into an aspect that most players will see haphazardly or skim by briefly, in my opinion, it just takes the cake. Stardew Valley. The concept for this video originally stemmed from ultimately what makes video game maps good and bad, taking a little deep dive into the various elements that make them what they are. However, I do think that, admittedly, I got a bit lost along the way and kind of just started to appreciate the maps for what they were and their unique aspects in general. Maybe I could have used a map to keep me on topic. Now, as much as I would love to wriggle my way into a definitive answer for what makes video game maps good and bad, unfortunately it just can't be that satisfying all the time. Every video game is inherently different and tries to convey something unique and completely original to the universe it is creating. So I guess I'm left with a really underwhelming answer of it depends, which I know isn't very satisfying, but some games suit a lesser map, some games benefit from having an expansive, detail-oriented map, and some games are better with none at all. So I guess it really does just depend. I mean, who knows, maybe I can like spin this into a kind of meta commentary and make it so that it's not about the destination, but it's about the journey. But anyway, I'm rambling, but more than that, I'm just Jack. Thanks for watching. Rufus the raccoon scores a basket. I'm out.